Harry, Ron, and Hermione stood behind the leaky cauldron, their eyes fixed on the seemingly ordinary brick wall. Harry stepped forward, wand in hand, and tapped the correct sequence of bricks. A small shudder went through the wall as the bricks began to shift and move, giving way to reveal the magical marketplace of Diagon Alley. They stepped through the archway, and the bustling world of Diagon Alley greeted them. The sights, the smells, and the chatter filled the air. Owls hooted, children laughed, and a soft melody played from a nearby shop selling magical instruments. Ron's eyes widened. Blimey, it never gets old, does it? Hermione shook her head, smiling. Never. Look at all the new supplies. I've heard Flourish and Blot's got a new shipment of rare spellbooks. Harry grinned. Let's check it out then. The trio made their way through the cobblestone streets, passing a plethora of magical shops. They stopped briefly to admire the new racing brooms at Quality Quidditch Supplies, their eyes lingering on the sleek designs and aerodynamic twigs. Finally, they arrived at Flourish and Blot's. The air inside was thick with the scent of freshly printed parchment and aging leather. Stacks of books reached almost to the ceiling, their spines filled with tantalizing titles, like charms of the undying and transmogrification for the tired wizard. Hermione's eyes sparkled. Oh, I could spend all day here. Harry chuckled. We better make sure you don't, or we won't get anything else done. They each picked a few books and made their way to the counter. As they paid for their selections, the shopkeeper gave them a nod and a smile, clearly happy to see young wizards so enthralled by literature. After leaving Flourish and Blot's, the trio's next stop was the apothecary. The shop was dimly lit, and the air was thick with a cocktail of scents, some pleasant, like lavender and mint, others pungent and almost unbearable. Jars filled with mysterious ingredients lined the walls: dragon liver, moonstone, ground unicorn horn. Ron wrinkled his nose. It always smells like my Uncle Bilious sock drawer in here. Harry laughed, while Hermione read through a list of potion ingredients. We need some of these for the new term, she mused, selecting jars and handing them to Ron, who was trying to balance them all in his arms. Once they'd gathered their ingredients, they decided it was time for a treat. How about some ice cream at Fortescue's? Suggested Harry. Brilliant, Ron agreed. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting golden rays onto the cobblestones as they made their way to Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor. They chose a small table outside and ordered a sundae each. Harry opted for a chocolate and raspberry mix, Hermione for a delicate lavender and honey, and Ron for, well, let's just say Ron couldn't decide, so he mixed about 5 different flavors together. As they sat enjoying their ice creams, Harry felt a warm sense of contentment. There's no place like Diagon Alley, he said, gazing at the sun casting long shadows across the magical marketplace. Hermione nodded, her eyes meeting Harry's. It's like stepping into another world, isn't it? A world where anything seems possible. Just then, Ron spotted a familiar silver beard and half-moon glasses approaching them from a distance. Isn't that Dumbledore? Harry finished Ron's sentence. Yes, indeed, it is Dumbledore, Hermione confirmed, as the wise old wizard made his way towards them, smiling benignly. His eyes twinkled, as they always did, giving him an air of someone who knew secrets the world had yet to discover. Ah, Harry, Hermione, Ronald, what a delight to find you here, greeted Dumbledore as he stopped beside their table. And may I say, those sundaes look absolutely scrumptious. Ron couldn't help but grin, almost childishly. Would you like a bite, Professor? Dumbledore chuckled. Tempting as it is, I must decline. I've actually come for a different sort of treat, intellectual nourishment, you might say. The trio exchanged glances, intrigue filling their eyes. I thought perhaps you'd like to join me on a visit to the Wise Wyam bookshop. They've recently acquired a collection of ancient scrolls that I believe could be both instructive and entertaining for young minds, such as yourselves, Dumbledore explained. Harry, Hermione, and Ron shared a quick, unspoken agreement. We'd be honored, Professor, said Harry. Excellent. Shall we? Dumbledore gestured down the cobblestone street, and they left the comfort of their ice cream haven to follow him. As they walked, the sun dipped even lower, casting a warm orange glow on the shop windows. The light seemed to dance on Dumbledore's silver hair, making him look almost ethereal. They arrived at the Wise Wyam bookshop, a quaint, narrow building, squished between a joke shop and a potion ingredient store. Its wooden sign was adorned with a beautifully painted dragon curled around a pile of books. Dumbledore pushed the door open, a bell tinkling softly as they stepped inside. The air was dense, with the smell of parchment, ink, and age-old wisdom. The walls were lined with dark oak bookshelves that seemed to reach endlessly upwards, a ladder on wheels tucked into one corner for those hard-to-reach volumes. Go on, have a look around, Dumbledore encouraged, gesturing to the labyrinth of bookshelves around them. I'll be over here. He pointed to a section labeled Ancient Texts and Scrolls, if you need me. Ron immediately gravitated towards the magical creatures and beasts section, his eyes lighting up at the sight of a new release on hippogriffs. Hermione was, unsurprisingly, drawn to the shelves marked Advanced Spellwork, where she began to carefully examine a leather-bound book on nonverbal spells. Harry wandered, a bit aimlessly at first, before his eyes settled on a section that seemed to call to him legendary artifacts and cursed objects. As he leafed through a book about the history of Horcruxes, he felt a chill run down his spine, but also an odd sense of fascination. Minutes, or maybe even hours, seemed to pass in the blink of an eye. Such was the magic of this place, where time seemed to stretch and compress in unexpected ways. Finally, Dumbledore clapped his hands softly to gather their attention. I see we've all found something to pique our interest. Shall we make our selections and continue on our evening? Each with a book or scroll in hand, they made their way to the counter, where an elderly witch wrapped their choices in brown paper and twine. Ah, I see you've chosen wisely, Dumbledore noted, peering at their selections. These will serve you well in your years at Hogwarts, and perhaps even beyond. With their new treasures safely tucked away, they stepped back into the cobblestone streets of Diagon Alley, the sky now a deep shade of twilight. The lanterns had been lit, and the whole place looked as though it had been sprinkled with stardust. Thank you, Professor, for this wonderful experience, Hermione said earnestly. It was my pleasure, my dear. Knowledge, after all, is one of the few things that grow when shared, Dumbledore responded, his eyes twinkling brighter than ever. And as they bid their farewells, heading their separate ways into the magical night, each felt a deep sense of contentment. Their eyes were heavy, their minds filled with dreams of spells, magical creatures, and untold wisdom, all waiting to be discovered. Their footsteps grew slower, their eyelids heavier, as they each felt the gentle pull of sleep, luring them into a world of dreams as magical as the one they had just explored. Just as Dumbledore was about to offer some final words of wisdom, there was a slight flicker in the air, and in the blink of an eye, he was gone. The place where he had stood moments before was now empty, as though he had never been there at all. The sudden departure was so swift that it left Harry, Hermione, and Ron momentarily stunned. Well, That's Dumbledore for you. Ron finally broke the silence, his voice tinged with awe and a hint of amusement. Always popping in and out when you least expect it. True, Hermione agreed, her eyes still fixed on the empty space where the headmaster had stood. But he always has his reasons. Harry couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder mixed with a bit of melancholy. Dumbledore's sudden disappearance seemed to signal the end of an extraordinary day, a subtle reminder that the magical world was full of unpredictabilities. They began to walk slowly towards the exit of Diagon Alley, each absorbed in their own thoughts, their footsteps echoing softly on the cobblestones. The sky above them was now a blanket of dark velvet, dotted with twinkling stars, as if the heavens themselves had decided to participate in the magic of the evening. As they reached the familiar brick wall behind the Leaky Cauldron, Harry took out his wand and tapped the bricks in the same pattern as before. The wall quivered for a moment before parting, revealing the bustling world of Muggle London beyond. As they stepped through, they felt a gentle transition, as though they were crossing an invisible boundary between two very different but equally wonderful worlds. The sounds of Diagon Alley, a blend of laughter, whispers, and the distant tinkling of wind chimes began to fade, gradually replaced by the hum of car engines, the footsteps of late-night pedestrians, and the distant wail of a siren. Yet, as they emerged into the night, each felt an overwhelming sense of peace and calm wash over them. Their eyes grew heavier, their thoughts began to blur, and the pull of sleep became increasingly irresistible. And so, as they walked back to the Leaky Cauldron to retrieve their coats and say their goodnights, they did so with hearts full of gratitude and minds teeming with dreams, each step bringing them closer to the restful embrace of sleep. And in that moment, they knew that the adventures of the day would live on, not just in their memories, but in the magical realm of dreams that awaited them. Harry, Ron, and Hermione looked at each other in utter bewilderment as Dumbledore vanished in a flurry of twinkling lights. For a moment, they stood there, speechless. What just happened? Ron finally managed to sputter out. Was that even real? Hermione shook her head, equally puzzled. I don't know, but I have a feeling we'll find out soon enough. Until then, we should probably keep exploring. As if snapping back to reality, the trio found themselves once more in the bustling atmosphere of Diagon Alley. The kaleidoscope of colors from the shop's signs and wares drew them back in. They passed Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, and Ron couldn't help but shoot a proud glance at his brother's establishment. Next, they passed Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions, with its delicate fabrics floating in the air like enchanted butterflies. A soft melody began to play, filling the air with a magical tune that seemed to resonate from the very cobblestones. It was as if Diagon Alley itself was singing them a lullaby. The trio felt their steps slow down, and their eyes grew heavy. Harry, feeling an inexplicable sense of warmth and comfort, looked up at the sky, which was transitioning from the warm hues of twilight into the indigo ink of night. The first stars began to appear, twinkling like precious gems on a celestial crown. Let's sit down for a moment, Hermione suggested, noticing a conveniently empty bench near the magical menagerie, whose peculiar sounds of exotic creatures served as an oddly comforting backdrop. As they sat, Harry couldn't help but feel grateful for moments like these, where nothing particularly extraordinary was happening. But somehow, everything felt just right. Ron, yawning, pulled out a bag of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans and popped one into his mouth. Ah, marshmallow, he said, eyes closing momentarily in contentment. Hermione glanced at her friends and felt her heart swell with affection. Here they were, in the heart of the magical world they all loved so dearly, on the cusp of yet another year at Hogwarts. And for this fleeting moment, all was well. Just then, a soft voice spoke behind them. "Good evening, my young friends." They turned around to see none other than Professor McGonagall, standing there with a serene smile. Harry, Ron, and Hermione looked at each other and then back at their Transfiguration teacher, curious but content. Professor McGonagall's eyes twinkled as she spoke. "It seems you've discovered one of Diagon Alley's best-kept secrets. This place has a magic all its own, and sometimes it chooses to share it with those in need of a little peace." Feeling a warmth spread through them at her words, they realized the truth in them. Diagon Alley, with its mix of the extraordinary and the mundane, had given them exactly what they needed: a pause, a breath, a moment of calm before the whirlwind of another school year. "Do sleep well," Professor McGonagall said softly, turning to leave. "Tomorrow is a big day." The trio nodded, suddenly feeling a comforting drowsiness envelop them. And as they sat there, under the starlit sky, listening to the soft murmurs and magical sounds of Diagon Alley, they felt their eyes grow heavy, and they knew that peaceful dreams awaited them in the night to come. As Professor McGonagall's footsteps gradually faded away into the night, the trio sat in silence, absorbing the serenity that had washed over them. Even the sounds from the magical menagerie seemed to have quietened, as if the creatures themselves sensed the tranquility of the moment. Harry, Ron, and Hermione each felt as if they were enveloped in a soft, invisible blanket of comfort. The flickering lamps that lined the street of Diagon Alley glowed a bit softer, their lights resembling gentle fireflies in the twilight. Ron broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "You ever think about how many memories we've made here, in this alley?" Hermione smiled gently. "More than I can count. It's like each cobblestone holds a story of its own." Harry looked down at the ground and then back up at his friends. "It's strange, but I feel like Diagon Alley is telling us its own kind of bedtime story tonight, urging us to take this moment to just be." Trio shared a quiet laugh, a soft and unspoken agreement hanging in the air between them. A leaf lazily drifted from one of the magical plants near the apothecary, finally resting on the cobblestone ground. It was as if even nature was participating in this tender pause. Gradually, the crowds began to thin as witches and wizards headed home, their faces content and their bags full of magical wares. One by one, the shops dimmed their lights, preparing to close for the night. And yet, the alley never felt dark. The stars above seemed to have conspired to keep a tender luminescence alive. The trio rose from the bench, each feeling a slight tug of sleepiness at their eyes, but also a fulfilling warmth in their hearts. "We should probably head back too," Hermione suggested, her voice tender. Harry nodded. "Yeah, tomorrow is another day. A big one, according to McGonagall." As they started to make their way toward the Leaky Cauldron, Ron felt a final yawn escape his lips. "Good night, Diagon Alley," he murmured. "Good night," Harry and Hermione echoed softly as they stepped through the archway leading back to the familiar, comforting confines of the Leaky Cauldron. In that moment, just before they crossed the threshold, they each took one final look back at Diagon Alley. It was as if the magical street itself was nodding back at them, confirming that their little pause, their brief respite, was a shared experience, a silent promise of many peaceful nights to come. As they stepped into the Leaky Cauldron and the walls sealed behind them, Harry, Ron, and Hermione felt their eyes grow even heavier, knowing that a sense of peace would accompany them into their dreams, wrapping around them like a comforting, invisible cloak. And in that second, their hearts filled with the simple but profound joy of being in a world that was as ready for sleep as they were. The door of the Leaky Cauldron closed gently behind them, marking the end of another magical day and the beginning of a night filled with the sweetest of dreams. Each step they took toward the fireplace for flow travel seemed to echo softly, as if the very walls of the Leaky Cauldron were bidding them a gentle farewell. Tom, the innkeeper, gave them a warm smile from behind the counter. Sensing the quietude that had enveloped them all, they approached the hearth, its warm glow resembling a cozy, inviting sunset. Hermione took a handful of Floo powder from the jar by the mantel. The green flames danced up to meet her hand, almost as if excited to partake in this bedtime journey. "Are you ready?" Hermione asked, her voice tinged with an almost maternal warmth. Harry and Ron nodded. "After you," said Harry. With a gracious nod, Hermione stepped into the fireplace. "The Burrow," she spoke clearly. In an instant, she vanished in a swirl of emerald flames, leaving behind an ambience that seemed to momentarily miss her presence. Ron went next, his gaze lingering for an extra second on Harry before he too said, "The Burrow," and was whisked away by the flow network. Finally, it was Harry's turn. As he stepped into the fireplace, he felt an inexplicable peace fill him. He took a deep breath, the scent of burning wood and a hint of magic filling his nostrils. "The Burrow," he declared, his voice soft yet confident. And just like that, he was enveloped by the emerald flames, feeling himself spiral through the intricate pathways of the flow network. But unlike other times, this journey felt incredibly serene, as if he were floating gently down a stream, guided by an invisible hand. He arrived at the Burrow to find Ron and Hermione waiting for him. Their faces were flushed from the warmth of the hearth, their eyes shining with a combination of sleepiness and contentment. The familiarity of the Burrow, with its lopsided structure and comforting homeliness, added another layer of peacefulness to their state. "Welcome back, Harry," said Hermione softly. Harry simply nodded, feeling as if words were too loud for this sacred space of impending sleep. And so, the trio made their way to their respective rooms, each step lighter than the last, as if they were ascending a staircase made of clouds. Finally, as they each closed the door to their rooms, the soft click of the latch sounded like a lullaby's final note, a gentle, full stop to their waking hours. They climbed into their beds, the sheets feeling softer than ever, almost as if the fabric had been enchanted to offer extra comfort tonight. And as they lay there, on the cusp of sleep, their minds began to drift away from the world of waking, slipping effortlessly into the realm of dreams. Their breaths deepened, their thoughts slowed, and one by one, they succumbed to the sweet, beckoning call of sleep, each entering their own dream-filled world, their hearts filled with a tranquil joy. Outside, the night sky seemed to twinkle a bit brighter, as if the stars themselves were joining in on this collective moment of peace. And as sleep fully embraced them, it felt as though the universe itself was tucking them in, whispering a soft goodnight into their dreams.